Hello, everybody. I'm Neil Robson, a member of the Wandsworth Historical Society. This is the story of an elderly queen and a lorry driver. Once upon a time, there was a queen who was passionate about gardening. Her name was Mary, and she was the mother of King George VI. On the afternoon of the 23rd of May, 1939, Queen Mary was returning from a visit to the Royal Horticultural Society gardens in Wisley. Her Daimler was driving north up Wimbledon Park Road when it came to this junction. This is a junction between that road and West Hill Road. As fate would have it, coming up the side road at that very moment was a heavy-duty lorry loaded with steel piping. There was a collision. The royal limousine spun round on itself and then turned over on its side. Passers-by looked on in horror and ran to help the occupants of both of the vehicles. If you look to the right, we're looking down a hill there, and this is the impressions you have. On the right-hand side, you can see that there's a grey building. In 1939, those are the premises of Southfields Engineering Works. It's now a Honda dealership. Standing in the forecourt, so I guess where you can see those red cars are, was the owner of that company. His name was Herbert Austin, and he was in conversation having a chat with his sales manager, a Cornishman, whose name was Leslie Kergendon. Now, this is the spring of 1939. Both men were undergoing training in air raids rescue work. They heard the horror of the crash. They ran up this hill towards us, so to speak, to see what they could do. And Kergendon clambered up onto the roof of the car, which of course by then was one of the doors, wrenched open the door, looked inside, and imagine his surprise, there was a heap of 5 bodies. Almost simultaneous with this, other members of staff from that garage were also coming up the hill. They too were trained, and they were bringing ladders, and they managed to get a ladder propped up to what was the top of the car, and a small ladder inside the car, and they helped the occupants out. Meanwhile, it must be recorded, other members of the public were comforting the lorry driver. He fortunately was uninjured, though he was in a state of shock. The royal party were taken up a hill to the left of this photograph, probably about 100 meters, no more than that, to the house of a nearby doctor. Sadly, as chance would have it, the good Dr. Stanley Revel had died the previous week. However, his son Frederick was at home, thank heavens, and the party went in. This is a middle-class pre-war lifestyle. He managed to get his staff, would you believe, his staff organized, and down in the kitchens they arranged cups of tea. Frederick bandaged up the injured arm of the lady in waiting, and somewhat astonishingly, he gave Queen Mary one of his father's aspirins. Telephone was provided, of course, and the controller or the chauffeur was able to ring to Marlborough House in central London. A relief limousine arrived outside the house, by which time there was a crowd gathered, and according to the Times, the crowd, when they saw Queen Mary emerge, they showed their relief and sympathy in a burst of cheering. This is the spring of 1939. One of the people in that crowd, this chimes with our own era, coincidentally, was a refugee. Fräulein Fritzi Adler had just arrived from Czechoslovakia, which had recently been occupied by Nazi forces. She was interviewed by a reporter, a journalist from the Borough News, and Fräulein Adler said, I've been here only 10 days. I did not know she was a queen, but she looked one. Other members of that engineering company were on hand to help. The Daimler dealership sent a flatbed truck, and one of the mechanics, Bill Bradley, with others, managed to get the Queen's limousine back up on its wheels again. I spoke to someone a few years ago who actually knew Bill Bradley, and that person said to me that Bradley's language was simply dreadful, but nobody seemed to mind. We can only imagine the feelings, the excitement, we may say, and the conversation of the people that evening. Seems to have been a bright, sunny May evening, last spring of peace for many years. And this incredible photograph is taken, I believe, next door from where the doctor's house was. And we see people gathered. That cluster you can see on the left-hand side, that is the very spot where the overturned limousine had come to rest. For those of you with a certain interest, of course, this is nearer when Britain had a sizable car manufacturing industry. So foreign vehicles were comparatively rare. So it is a point of note that pale-coloured vehicle just on the other side of the road is indeed an Italian-made car, which is, for the record, a Fiat 1500. The emotional response in the country to Queen Mary's accident was immediate, and it feels that it was a sincere one as well. Look at this. This is a cutting I found in the Manchester Guardian. Now that's a left of centre newspaper. And so you wouldn't think they would hold a great deal of truck for royalty, but see the opening sentence. Anything happening to Queen Mary seems somehow against the order of things. Within a day or so, her office got their act together and sent out some quite clearly sincere sounding letters of thanks to various people who had helped that afternoon. Notable is this one, and I'm delighted to have found in the archives this photograph taken a few days later. So here you see two heroes from the incident. There's Herbert Austin on the right, and he's holding the letter that he received from Marlborough House. And there to the left, there is great big Cornishman Leslie Cagendon, and he is holding the envelope, which I presume has an embossed M and a crown or something like that on the back. This was a source of pride, and I was told by the same person I spoke to that for many years, into the years after the Second World War, if anyone mentioned the incident to Herbert Austin, proudly got that letter out for people to see. The Queen was injured. She was shot. She suffered from heavy bruising. The woman was in her early 70s, and a glass splinter had entered her eye, and that injury troubled her right through to her death in May 1953. And there's great affection for her, and so it's hardly surprising to know when she first made an appearance after the incident in early June. Here she is traveling in Horse Guards Parade for Trooping the Colour. Little girl, further away, of course, is Princess Elizabeth. As she entered Horse Guards Parade, she was greeted with warm cheers. So it was a serious incident, of course. People were injured, but mercifully, it wasn't worse than that. We have to get some sort of sense of context, perspective about it all. Why did it cause such a stir at the time? Well, I think there are three reasons. And 1930s, of course, a different era from our own, and yet some parallel concerns. It's the timing of this incident. It brought to the forefront a long-standing anxiety about road safety. The statistics are awful, hard for us to credit. Sometimes there was almost a feeling, a sense of bewilderment that drivers and other road users just didn't look out for one another. Cars were less safe anyway. And here's an instance how there was an attempt to raise public concern, as you see through the medium of a set of cigarette cards. This is the front page of an album. Safety first, that was the slogan, trying to urge people to be more careful about hazards. Indeed, the Observer newspaper, the Sunday after the accident, actually said in an editorial, "The problems of road traffic have by no means yet reached a satisfactory solution." How right they were. Just look at this. These are the statistics that I found when I was researching this talk. In 1938, there were only, that's inverted commas, there were only 3 million motor vehicles in the United Kingdom, and yet 6,500 people were killed. A huge ratio. The most recent statistic I've been able to find, we have something like 34 million vehicles on our roads, and yet only, and I say this with caution, of course, and with respect, but only 1,300 people have died on our roads in 2018. We're more alert, more aware, and vehicles, of course, are safer. So that was that anxiety, and so to speak, the accident trying to do that. Second point to be made is that the incident broke through what we might say the armor plating of Queen Mary through undeniably a benign, non-critical press. The image that was her persona, we may say, that was presented was of a woman who was rigid, who was dutiful, who was dignified. An example of her steadfastness is this iconic situation. Coronation Day, and a couple of years earlier. It is or has been the convention that an anointed consort, and she was in 1911 an anointed consort, simply does not attend, it's breach of protocol, does not attend the anointing of her successors. Mary would have none of that. Following the trauma of the abdication, she was determined to show her presence at George VI's coronation and to emphasize that continuity. Well, that armor-plated image, of course, was dented, was damaged when people learned that she was vulnerable and that she could be hurt. The third point, I think, is of considerable interest. It's quite extraordinary, this. It's quite amazing to recognize that the accident had minor constitutional implications. They couldn't get the news through to the king. George VI and Queen Elizabeth were over in Canada shortly to go on to the United States as their quite significant visit at the time. They were drumming up support. There were fears, totally justified. There were fears that there'd be war in Europe and we needed them to help us. Of course, this is not the age of internet. There's no texting. So they actually had to wait. The officials had to wait until the royal train came to a scheduled stop just east of Winnipeg before they could hand in a note which said, "Make contact with London, your mum's been hurt." It was as distant as that. The law then did not permit Queen Mary to be a councillor of state in the absence of the royal couple. But nevertheless, she did play a role. And although she was ill, she was convalescing, nevertheless, she responded well to this incident. This was an appalling tragedy. Only a handful of days later, you see on the left a Royal Navy submarine which foundered in just off Birkenhead. Virtually every one of the men on it died. They were killed. Appalling tragedy. Queen Mary was the most significant person in the country to send a message of sympathy to the bereaved families following the incident, and this was widely applauded. One of the more popular papers actually said, in a slightly affectionate fashion, said that in the absence of the King and Queen, Queen Mary is our social head of state. Neither the chauffeur nor the lorry driver was prosecuted. With the build-up towards war, I wonder perhaps the moment was simply too sensitive for a court case to take place. By the end of June, an affectionate British public going to the cinema were able to see in the newsreels this shot of Queen Mary leading the other senior members of the royal family, going up the gangway onto the liner that brought back George and Elizabeth from their outstandingly successful tour of North America. And within not much more than 2 months after that, the whole country gathered round their wireless sets as they heard Mr. Chamberlain speak to the nation from number 10 Downing Street saying that war was declared. Now that was a moment that changed the course of history. Thank you, everybody, for joining me.